Before the video begins, I want to thank my patrons, both for supporting the channel and providing the topic for today's video. The Hail Mary is a term most every football fan knows, a final desperation heave to the end zone when all else has failed. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but whatever the case, it provides spectacle. It's a term whose origins will begin our look into the most spectacular, controversial, and unbelievable finishes in college football history. Origins that date all the way back to October 28th, 1922, in Atlanta, Georgia. In a matchup between two early college football juggernauts, Georgia Tech finds themselves up 3-0 in the second quarter against Notre Dame. It's here, shortly before a fourth down play to hopefully get on the board, where a Presbyterian playing for the Irish said, "Boys, let's have a Hail Mary," and following a short prayer to the Virgin Mary, Notre Dame scored their first touchdown of the game. Then, late in the fourth quarter, looking to seal the game away, on another fourth down play, let's have another Hail Mary. Sure enough, it'd work again, and Notre Dame would walk out of Atlanta with a 13-3 win. "Say, that Hail Mary is the best play we've got," said the Presbyterian after the game. And like that, the first Hail Mary was born. However, the true last-second low percentage pass that the Hail Mary is synonymous with now was still yet to be born, with the term simply referring to a prayer before an important play. For the first true Hail Mary, you have to go forwards to 1935, and another come-from-behind victory for Notre Dame. Down 12-13 late in the fourth to the Ohio State Buckeyes, the Irish need a miracle, and with starting quarterback Andy Pilney going out to injury following a long run, they need halfback William Shakespeare, real name, to step up and make that miracle happen. After his first pass was batted down, Shakespeare's Hail Mary would come to life. Notre Dame would win 18-13. The term for much of the 20th century would see relatively frequent use, but almost entirely within Catholic universities. Georgetown would outright plan to Hail Mary their way to victory in a 1941 Orange Bowl against Mississippi State, and a Yale scout would comment on a 59-yard last-minute, quote, Martin Luther play from Cornell to beat Harvard, noting the play's identity on the other side of the Reformation. Yet through the play of Catholic quarterback Roger Staubach and the NFC divisional playoffs between the Cowboys and Vikings, the term would begin to see more general use. Seen clear as day in its use in a game between two teams consisting of Methodists and Mormons. The 1980 Holiday Bowl would feature two of the best programs of the early 80s, the Pony Express SMU Mustangs, led by two of the best running backs in the game, Eric Dickerson and Craig James, and the high-flying BYU Cougars. The expectation was a shootout, and a shootout was exactly what went down, with SMU taking a 38-19 lead going into the fourth. Just as BYU fans began to leave, though, Cougar quarterback Jim McMahon would exclaim, simply, "The game isn't over yet," before throwing a touchdown to keep the dream of BYU's first bowl victory alive. Then, after a recovered onside kick, they'd reach the end zone yet again to cut the Mustangs' lead to 6. Afterwards, the defense would hold the shell-shocked SMU to a punt. A blocked punt, to put the Cougars at the Mustang 41 with seconds left on the clock. It'd all come down to one glorious Hail Mary.
46, throwing for the end zone. Receivers are there, defenders are there. It is in the end zone. Who has the ball? Touchdown!
4 years later, and the blessings of the Virgin Mary would come, yet again, to a Catholic university, in another 80s shootout. In 1984, Boston College in Miami would field some of the best quarterbacks of the 80s, with the Hurricanes' Bernie Kosar and the Eagles' Doug Flutie both emerging throughout the year as some of the best passers in the nation, and nearly unrivaled proficiency seen in their game against one another on November 23rd, with both combining for almost 1,000 yards in a back-and-forth shootout. One Miami would seemingly ice in the fourth, taking a 45-41 lead with 28 seconds left on the clock. Flutie, stuck at the Hurricanes' 48-yard line, would need to throw a daunting 60-plus yard pass against the wind after already having thrown for more than 40 times throughout the game. He shouldn't have had the arm strength to do it, but yet, he did it nonetheless. The play would become known as the Hail Flutie, a play that likely sealed away his Heisman, becoming Boston College's first and only Heisman winner. Almost 20 years removed from this miracle named after a quarterback, would come a quarterback named after a miracle. In 2001, the Miami of Ohio Red Hawks found themselves in a dogfight with conference mates Akron, coming back from a 24-6 halftime deficit to seemingly win the game for the Zips with a late field goal to go up 27-24. Soon, the Red Hawks freshman quarterback would be forced to make one last heave downfield with 3 whole seconds left on the clock.
Roethlisberger backs up, now steps up in the pocket, has time, unloads the football, it's going down, and batted up in the air. Picked up by oh my goodness!
The play itself would be called Big Ben, a term whose origins, funnily enough, also trace back to Atlanta, specifically the late 70s Atlanta Falcons. It was a play whose nickname would stick to the freshman quarterback who executed it, Miami of Ohio's Ben Roethlisberger. In between the long list of college football's Hail Marys are a collection of desperation plays that, while not technically being Hail Marys, still accomplish the same outcome and elicit the same feelings as your textbook Hail Mary. In 1997, the Nebraska Cornhuskers are hoping to escape Columbia, Missouri with their undefeated season still intact. An outcome that looked more and more grim as the Tigers took a 38-31 lead late into the fourth. With a minute left on the clock, though, Nebraska would storm down the field, eventually making it onto Missouri's 12-yard line with 7 seconds left on the clock.
Third down. Cross to the middle. Juggle.
Nebraska would tie the game at 38, eventually beating Missouri in overtime to save their undefeated season, going on to win a share of the 1997 national title. A decade later, and an upstart program by the name of Boise State is looking for their first major bowl win. Having gone undefeated in the regular season for the second time as an FBS program, the Broncos are now looking to cap off their magical season with their first fully undefeated season, with the only obstacle in their way being the 7th-ranked Oklahoma Sooners. The Arizona brawl would last late into the night, going beyond regulation into overtime, where, after falling behind to the Sooners 42-35, the Broncos would find their way to the end zone to seemingly send the game into second overtime. Except, Boise State opted to go for 2, and win it there and then. When the ball was snapped, Bronco quarterback Jared Zabransky would seemingly throw it to his right, with the Oklahoma defense responding accordingly. Zabransky never let go of the ball, swinging it around to running back Ian Johnson to clinch Boise State's first undefeated season, executing the most famous Statue of Liberty play in the process. Of course, last-minute wins can hardly just be found on the offensive side of the ball. In the 2013 Iron Bowl, an undefeated Alabama would meet a top-5 Auburn and perhaps the highest-stake SEC game of the year, with a berth in both the SEC title game and possibly the BCS National Championship game at stake. Late in the fourth, the game is tied 28-28, and Alabama is looking to at least try to end the game with a long 57-yard field goal, unsure whether or not freshman quarterback Adam Griffith had the leg to boot it in. Auburn would put someone in the end zone just in case it was short so it could be fielded. When the kick was finally made, it indeed came up short, and punt returner Chris Davis would do a little more than just field the missed kick.
Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis. No flags. Touchdown.
Auburn would go on to play in the SEC and BCS championship games, and the kick six would be remembered as the first time a game ended on a field goal attempt returned 100 yards, a result so spectacular that mini earthquakes could be felt all across the state of Alabama. Then, of course, there's the world of lateral plays, the most famous of which being the play. It's a game I've gone much more in depth about in a previous video, but to keep it short, in a 1982 game between Stanford and California, Cardinal quarterback John Elway is going into Berkeley needing one more win to both bring his team to the Hall of Fame Classic and likely secure a Heisman before going off to the pros. The rivalry game would devolve into a dogfight, though, with Stanford seemingly winning it late on a field goal to go up 20-19. Cal, though, had just enough time to field one last Stanford kick, which they did, before lateraling the ball 6 times and storming into the end zone, and the Stanford band, who thought the game was already over. Decades later, and the spirit of the play would be reborn on the East Coast. The Duke Blue Devils, late in the fourth, looked to have bested the Miami Hurricanes 27-24, keeping their hopes of a division title alive, so long as they can keep Miami from reaching the end zone. What followed was an unbelievable 8 laterals from the Canes, slowly but surely stretching out Duke's defenders before finally finding an outside route to the end zone, miraculously coming up with the win. In all of these games, whether through luck, immense skill, or both, teams have ended games in unbelievable fashion. But what happens when the opposite occurs? What happens when you go beyond the Hail Mary and into the world of disastrous mistakes? We begin where we left off, with another game from the Miami Hurricanes. Entering their 5th game of the 2023 season undefeated and ranked in the AP poll, the Canes were expected to confidently handle a Georgia Tech squad 1 week away from a humiliating loss to Bowling Green, bouncing back from an anemic first half to go up 20-17 late. Now, with possession of the ball and seconds ticking down, all Miami needs to do is kneel. Except, for some reason, they don't. The players seem confused, but run it up the middle anyways, where...
Ball popped out.
You gotta read the clock. Read the card. To me,
Georgia Tech has it with 26 seconds left.
Now with possession of the ball, Georgia Tech would quickly get down the field and cash out, somehow coming out of Coral Gables with a 23-20 win, and spoiling Miami's undefeated season. Now, I had planned to shit on Cristobal a little bit more in this section, but due to recent events, I don't think I can anymore. Credit to Cristobal, though, this is not the worst failure to kneel on the college level. It's 1999, and the Baylor Bears have forgotten how to play football. Since joining the Big 12 in '96, the Bears have failed to get even close to breaking above 500, the beginning of an eventual 16-year losing season streak. Wins are simply hard to come by. In their second game of the 1999 season, the Bears seem poised to get their first win of the year against UNLV. All they need to do is kneel, which they don't, opting to go for one more touchdown to, quote, instill an aggressive culture, I guess. Baylor, of course, would fumble the ball straight into UNLV's hands, running it all the way to the house for the 100-yard walk-off touchdown. Beyond these brain-dead decisions are a number of unfortunately costly mistakes that sank a variety of teams. We begin in the FCS, in a rivalry game between South Dakota and South Dakota State. Up by 3 with 8 seconds left on the clock, South Dakota State needs to burn one more down, doing so with a long pass to the stands, a pass just a second too short, giving South Dakota one more play to work with.
Camp under pressure, lets it fly, almost gets into the end zone, deflected up in the air, caught, touchdown, South Dakota!
My gosh, you have got to be kidding me.
While the Jackrabbits' mistake would give up a Hail Mary, a mistake that same year at Old Dominion would do the exact opposite. After going down 35-7 going into the second half, the Old Dominion Monarchs would begin piecing together a historic comeback, holding the Bowl offense scoreless while scoring 21 unanswered points of their own going into their final moments of the fourth quarter, where they'd cut the Buffalo lead to 1. There was just one tiny little problem. After the touchdown, Old Dominion's backup quarterback would go onto the field to celebrate, drawing a personal foul to back up the point after that had sent this game into overtime.
With 19 seconds to go. Snap is good. The ball is down. The kick is up. The extra point for Nick Wright is no good.
Of course, a list of miscues and mistakes would be incomplete without this 2015 game between Michigan and Michigan State. Looking to keep their playoff hopes alive and begin the Jim Harbaugh era with a bang, the Wolverines would hold a 2-point lead over the top 10 Spartans with a mere 10 seconds left to play. All they needed to do was punt the ball away, where, well, I'll let the announcer elaborate.
Get it out.
Whoa, he has trouble with the snap, and the ball is free. It's picked up by Michigan State. Jalen Watts Jackson, and he scores on the last play of the game.
Then there's a special kind of mistake that has ended way too many games. The personal foul. And not just number 7's missed time celebration, the real unsportsmanlike stuff. Beginning with a game I really do not want to talk about. The Florida Gators, going into their 10th game of the 2020 season, are in rare form. Number 6 in the nation with a clear road to their first playoff berth. However, due to both unfavorable weather conditions and the simple fact that every Florida LSU game is a fever dream, the game would be incredibly hard fought, with the Gators needing a stop late in the fourth to keep the game tied at 34. The Gators would end up getting that ever-important stop, knocking off a defender's shoe in the process. Enter Marco Wilson.
Cole Taylor get there? No, nowhere near the line to make. Tried to go up and over and could not escape.
Following the personal foul, LSU would kick the game-winning field goal, and the Florida Gators would finish the year 8-4. Before the shoe throw, however, there was Ole Miss. In the 2019 Egg Bowl, Ole Miss would find themselves down 7 to their in-state rival with 9 seconds left on the clock, yet in prime position to send the game into overtime. After a quick pass to Rebel receiver Elijah Moore, overtime would become a guarantee, if not for this. Right in front of the ref, too. The penalty would be enforced on the ensuing kick, which would veer wide right. A game decided by the mistakes, small and great, of a player or coach is rare, in some cases unforgivable, in all cases heartbreaking, but is, to some extent, understandable. It's a brash decision made by players and or coaches in the heat of the moment. It checks out. What doesn't exactly check out though, and what makes for some of the most controversial finishes of all time, is when the mistakes don't come from the teams, but instead come from the officials. Here's a question. How many downs are there in college football? Well, 4. Unless, of course, you're the Colorado Buffaloes on October 6, 1990. Down by 4 to the Missouri Tigers late, they would make it to the doorstep of leaving Columbia, Missouri with a hard-fought win to keep their national champion hopes alive. Colorado would use their first down to spike the ball, stopping the clock. On second down, they'd run it up the gut, failing to reach the end zone before calling a timeout. The officials responsible for keeping track of the downs lost track, keeping the Buffaloes on second down when it should have been third. On what should have been their third down, they'd be stuffed, no gain. On their fourth and supposedly final down, they'd spike the ball to stop the clock. And on their fifth down, a down that should not exist, they'd finally reach the end zone to quite literally steal away a win from the Tigers, going on to win a share of the 1990 national title. It's 2016, and Oklahoma State, shockingly, is sleepwalking their way through their out-of-conference slate, only up 27-24 to Central Michigan, where the Cowboys look poised to seal away the ugly win with a throw to the stands. Intentional grounding was called, but it shouldn't have mattered. The game should have been over. Instead, the refs mistakenly granted the Chippewas an untimed down, where, sure enough, they'd Hail Mary it down to around the Oklahoma State 9-yard line before lateraling it in for a win. All on a play that shouldn't have even been snapped. Staying with the Big 12, the 2009 Big 12 championship game would end in similar controversy to the 1990 Missouri-Colorado game. Yet, instead of adding a down, they'd add a second. Entering the final moments of the fourth quarter with a strenuous 12-10 lead, Nebraska needs to keep star quarterback Colt McCoy from pulling off any miracles. And with 10 seconds left on the clock, the Nebraska Blackshirts would seemingly do just that, forcing McCoy to throw it into the stands to hopefully give his team one last play. The clock would seemingly come down to 0, and the Cornhusker sidelines would celebrate, while the Longhorns argued for another second, claiming the ball went out of bounds before the clock hit 0. The refs would side with Texas. Another second was added to the clock, and Texas would make a last-second field goal. To be upfront, this is nothing in comparison to the 5th down game in terms of a mistake. There's plenty of gray area for both decisions to be justifiable, illuminating a truth about a lot of these miraculous finishes. The truth is that a lot of them are technically referee mistakes. There's the 97 flea kicker. Had the kick that set up the game-tying touchdown been ruled intentional, which it was, it would have been a flag, but instead the play stood. Then there's both the play in the later Miami-Duke game, both of which are filled to the brim with controversy over whether or not some of the laterals were illegal forward passes. The latter game even getting a handful of ACC refs suspended. In truth, in cases like this where the game comes down to a single play or a single call, unless a penalty is blatantly obvious, it's a lose-lose situation, as shown in one more questionable game. It's overtime in the 2003 Fiesta Bowl, and the number 1 Miami Hurricanes hold a 24-17 lead over the number 2 Ohio State Buckeyes, who need to convert a 4th and 3 to stay in the game. Buckeye quarterback Craig Krenzel would fire into the end zone and come up with nothing. Miami had won its 6th national title, except there was a flag on the play, a flag for pass interference. And soon after, in second overtime, Ohio State would win the 2002 national title, all on the back of this pass interference call. This is, I believe, why a lot of Hail Mary plays are non-calls, because it's just hard for viewers to stomach a game coming down to a debatable judgment call, even if that call is correct. It's a lose-lose situation, one that causes controversy no matter what happens. There is one last category of miraculous play I've left out, one that consists of a single game. It is far from the most obscure finish, but it stands alone as the most unbelievable finish in college football, and possibly among the most unbelievable in the history of American sports. It's late in the 1983 Egg Bowl, and Mississippi State is down by 1. But having driven all the way down the field, the Bulldogs are in prime position to end the game on a walk-off field goal. Despite the windy conditions, it should be a chip shot, being only 24 yards away. And as the football left kicker Artie Cosby's foot, it seemed as if it would indeed go right down the middle. Then, like an invisible hand pushing away Mississippi State's Egg Bowl victory, the ball would veer sharply to the left due to a sudden gust of wind. Ole Miss had won through divine intervention. It was the only explanation, with Mississippi State's head coach concluding, quote, "God decided that Mississippi State was not going to win this game." It is the only game, to my knowledge at least, like it. In a sense, that makes it the truest Hail Mary there is. The kind of Hail Mary that Presbyterian thought up over 100 years ago. And all these years later, in every decade and every nook and cranny of this country, it remains the best play we've got. Once again, thank you to each of my patrons: Cole, Nick Knudsen, Lurker, Trash Can Gus, Email Account, Sock'em Boppers, Ease.I, Spicy Bape, The Erupturatan, Adrian Genge, Deatheros, Sean McWilliams, CC, The Hidden Source, Bradley Moore, at Signwood, Scarface1, Lamb, Mega Doomer, Phillip, and Crosley Jones. Once again, thank you for watching. It's greatly appreciated. and I will see y'all in the next one.